I'd now like to introduce our two speakers who are basil aficionados. Susan Wilhelm grew up in Michigan and moved to DC after college for a job in public policy. Her earliest gardening memory is of her parents amending the soil in a backyard garden bed to allow raspberries to grow well. She and her husband often joke that they bought their house in Alexandria primarily because it had enough sun and enough space to grow tomatoes. Susan is an avid reader, loves to eat, and studies ikebana, which is the Japanese flower arranging art. As a master gardener, she's a member of the social media committee and primarily writes book reviews. She also teaches public education classes on vegetable gardening and herbs and mentors public education intern projects. So Kathryn Kellam is our second speaker. She grew up in South Carolina and has loved having her fingers in the dirt since she was a child. She moved to Virginia nearly 30 years ago, and after a career in professional development and research, became a certified master gardener in 2017. Her greatest pleasure in gardening is being able to eat what she grows. She's active in public education and leads the urban agriculture planning team. She's active with the help desk team, and she co-leads the Del Rey Plant Clinic. She enjoys providing gardening support to her neighbors in Alexandria, and she is nurturing a tiny young food forest in her small urban garden. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Susan and Kathryn. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Colleen. And good morning, everyone. Happy rainy Friday. This is the perfect weather to be inside learning about plants that hopefully you'll want to grow in your garden this summer. I'm Kathryn Kellam here with my colleague Susan Wilhelm, and we are so excited to share our love of all things basil with you today. Now, in terms of our program, I'm going to start out with kind of a grand tour of basil. We're going to look a little bit at history and background. We're going to look at a lot of different varieties of basil and a number of different reasons that you might want to grow these basils. I'm then going to hand it over to Susan. She's going to talk about caring for and growing your basil, and she's going to look at some common pests and diseases and how to address those. And then she's going to turn her sights to how to harvest basil correctly, depending on what you want to do with it, and some fun ways that you can use your basil and some ways you might want to consider preserving your basil. Now, of course, we'll break a few times for questions during the program. And I also want to mention that we have a couple of handouts for this program that cover a lot of the main points that Susan and I are going to be talking about. So we hope that you're not going to be scrambling to take notes, but rather sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. So let's start with a little history and background. Did you know that there are more than 150 basil species in the world? Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I see a lot of different basils in the garden center, so maybe 150 doesn't surprise me. But almost every basil you see in the garden center is a variety of a single species, Ocimum basilicum. And we're certainly going to look at a lot of those today, but some of the other basil species are also going to make an appearance. In terms of history, basil has had a bad reputation in early recorded history. And for some reason, it was closely associated with scorpions. Very scary stuff. My favorite story about basil and scorpions is the belief in early Greece that if you consumed a lot of basil, scorpions would actually infest and nest in your brain. How scary is that? Something interesting happened though. It didn't scare people off from basil. And the more people grew basil, incorporated into their food, and began to enjoy it, the more the stories began to change and become more positive in terms of its reputation. And by a few hundred years ago, basil's reputation centered around love, romantic love, the chastity of young women, and the flip side of that coin, basil's erotic powers, and basil as an invitation for a dalliance with one's lover. So definitely a lot more positive. Now, in terms of basil's history in our country, we have records that take it back to at least 1621, so early colonial era. And we know it was being grown in people's gardens then, which means it was being used. But for some reason, it seemed to remain kind of a sleeper herb. It didn't really gain public notice and acceptance until the 1970s. So 350 years after we know it was here, it suddenly exploded on the food scene. And today it is the single most popular herb in America. It is also incredibly popular around the globe. Basil is thought to have originated in Africa, and there are many different species of basil growing wild there. It also spread very freely and rapidly to other tropical and subtropical areas of the globe. So now there are native basils, not just from Africa, but also from Asia, the Middle East, and on our side of the globe, the Caribbean and South America. All these different cultures in all these different areas have embraced their local basils. They've incorporated them into food or for other functions in their community. And the reason that so many cultures embrace basils is because basils have a very rich and complex chemistry. We're going to look at that a little bit more from the gardener's perspective in a moment. But commercially, there's also a lot of interest in basil's rich chemistry. Big companies extract essential oils from basil. They use it to flavor foods, mouthwash, liqueur. It's used in colognes and perfume, and it's even used in insecticides, as some of you may know. I also am going to stop here and give a little public service announcement about basil. There are some historic problems with understanding which basil is which and what the proper name is for any given basil. From our perspective, there are two main sources of that. One is the basil itself. Basil is in the mint family, and it is a very promiscuous plant. Basils cross very easily with other basils, not just varieties within a single species. Basils actually cross easily with other basil species. And what this means is that you can get offspring that look very different than their parents and have very different fragrances than their parents. So it can lead to some very confusing lineages. Then you compound that with what marketing companies did when basil became popular in the 1970s. There were only so many basils around in those days, and the companies had a tendency to sell the available basils under their own names. So the same basil was being sold under many different names. It gave the companies kind of a visual edge because it looked like, well, we're the only ones who have this basil exclusively. But it was really the same few basils being sold under different names. A lot of that has improved today, but it's not entirely gone. And we'll see a couple of examples that when we do our tour of basil. Now, another problem that's less common, but seems to be a little bit more dug in, is the fact that a few basils have been sold historically under the wrong name. And there's an example of that on this slide here. What you see are pictures of two different basils. These are very good basils, but one is consistently marketed as though it is the other. Now, I'm going to leave that as a little bit of a teaser here, but we're going to revisit both of these basils in just a few minutes, and we'll dig into that in a little bit more detail. My purpose in sharing this information is not to scare you off of trying new basils. We definitely don't want to do that, but we'll tell you what we would tell you about purchasing any plant in the mint family, because there is a lot of promiscuity in those plants. Know what it is you want and why you want it, and then make your purchase accordingly. So, even with the identity problems, Susan and I believe very strongly that everyone should grow basil. It smells great, it comes in many delicious flavors, It's gorgeous in the garden. It's great for garden health, including attracting beneficial insects. And there is a basil for every size spot in your garden and for every pot, even the small ones. We're going to look at some of those in just a moment. Now back to that rich chemistry. This page is our attempt to give a visual representation of just how complex the flavor of basil can be. There's so many different chemicals with so many different flavors that you can find in a single basil. So what you see here, mint, pepper, lemon, clove, anise, cinnamon, and camphor, these can realistically all appear in a single basil leaf. You get some plants with more and some with fewer, but this is not a comprehensive list. There are still many more chemicals and many more flavors available to basils. Now, as part of our research for today's class, I grew out 20 different basils from seed, and Susan and I taste tested all of them together. And we're going to share our descriptions of the fragrances and flavors that we experienced. But I do want to offer a caveat to that, which is that flavor is a very individual thing, and your experience with the same basil might differ a little bit. I also want to share a couple of geeky science facts here, but because I think it's really important to your enjoying the flavors of the basils that you grow. And that is that rich chemistry in basil leaves is not static. The chemistry and the flavor change over time. So one example of that is that young basil leaves can have as much as 5 times the amount of aroma compounds as older leaves on the same plant, on the same stem. The second important fact about flavor is that flavor can actually vary in an individual basil leaf, and often it does. The tip of the basil leaf is older than the base of the leaf. And Susan and I actually tested this when we did our taste testing. We tasted the tip of the leaves, the center of the leaves, and the base of the leaves separately. And while it didn't apply to every single basil we tasted, more often than not, there were very detectable differences in terms of the flavors. So why is all of this important in terms of basil flavor? If you want to bring a new basil into your garden and you're very specific about the flavor that you want, your best bet is to taste a complete leaf that is young but mature. You're going to get the best, most complete, most accurate read of the flavor of that basil. Now, let's start taking a look at basils, and we're going to look at basil varieties grouped according to flavor or according to some of the other features of the plants. The most familiar basil to all of us is what we're calling the classic basil flavor, or Genovese or sweet basil. This is the basil that's familiar in Italian cooking, in French cuisine. It's the basil we make pesto with. And what you see is a small sample of the number of sweet basils that are available on the market. If you look at the lower left image on your screen, you'll see Genovese basil, classic Genovese basil. These plants tend to get pretty tall, 30 inches or sometimes more in the garden. And we know the delicious flavor is there. Now, if you look above, you'll see 2 plants with different colored leaves. And I'm going to refer to this leaf color as purple throughout, although it varies a little bit depending on the plants. But red rhubarb and amethyst are both purple-leaved varieties of sweet basil. They are not necessarily known for the best flavor. Something that happens with sweet basils when they come in the purple leaf color is that sometimes the flavor is duller, or it changes in some other fashion with the color change in chemistry. And so this is something to be aware of. If you want to bring purple basils into your garden for ornamental purposes or for fragrance, that's great. If you want to do it for flavor, be very, very sure that you do your homework and that you're going to get a flavor that you're going to be happy with. Now, in the center bottom, you see a basil called Everleaf Emerald Towers. This is a basil that was developed specifically for leaf production. The everleaf basils, and we'll see another example in a little while, they don't go to flower, they don't start producing blooms until 10 to 12 weeks later than the other similar basils. So if what you're looking for is the best production for pesto that you can get and the most leaves you can get, then this might be a great choice for you. To the right of everleaf is Tuscany, and it is one of many examples of lettuce leaf basils. And these have big, roughly leaves, very, very pretty. They're large plants. The flavor in the leaves is extremely mild. If you like basil, but you find the intensity of the flavor a bit much, this might be a great selection for you. It could also be a great selection for using the leaves on sandwiches in place of lettuce. And then up above that, you see one example of the Prospera line of basil downy mildew resistant basils. Now, all sweet basils, sadly, are very susceptible. And I'm just including this here to let you know that we're going to be addressing both basil downy mildew and the resistant basils a little bit later on. That's gonna happen in Susan's section. So hold your questions about that. Of all the basils here, they tend to be large and they're not necessarily great for containers with the exception of everleaf. But there are a lot more sweet basils on the market that were either bred for container culture or they've been selected for that. And two examples on this page are different versions of compact sweet basils. Genovese compact is in the lower left and Emily is up at the top near the right. Those are just classic sweet basils that come in a smaller size. I'm sure there are more out there as well. I want to point out some differences though. If you love basil, but it has a little bit more of a minty bite to it than you really like, then look at Momolo basil, which is on the upper left side of your screen. This basil is a little bit sweeter. It doesn't have that minty heart flavor. So if that mint bothers you, Momolo might be a great option for you. Then to the right of that large picture of Pesto perpetuo. This is a very beautiful hybrid basil. You can't grow it from seeds, so Susan and I did not have the opportunity to grow it out and taste it. It's here on the recommendation of another master gardener who has grown it and used it, enjoyed it for years. It has a reputation as a really terrific sweet basil with a little hint of lemon in the flavor profile. And then to the right of that is another purple basil, Crimson King. This is one that we did grow from seed and taste, and it actually had a really nice sweet basil flavor. Susan and I were very pleased with it. So if you're looking for purple and you also want good flavor, this one might be a really good choice for you. And then lastly, up above is another example of one of the Prospera basil downy mildew resistant basils, this one in a compact size. So if you want a resistant basil, you want something that size for container culture, then there's definitely an option for you out there. Now, what about if your garden is basically your kitchen windowsill or just a very tiny spot somewhere and you're looking for much smaller basils? Well, there are a number of choices out there, and this is a representation of what's out there. I do want to tell you up front that these beautiful little basils, kind of typically 8 to 12 inches tall, they are usually selected or bred primarily for ornamental purposes or fragrance or both. Sometimes they have good flavor, sometimes not. So if you're buying an itty bitty basil, and you want to be able to use the leaves for flavor, make sure you do your homework and that you're going to be satisfied with the one that you select. The ones across the top, a window box mini, boxwood, and round midnight, I don't have good, let's say, research or confidence in terms of how good their flavor profiles are. They're very attractive basils. I'm sure they're all very fragrant. Round midnight on the far right side there, that looks like a big basil, but that's actually the plant being used as edging in the garden. So that's a lot of little bitty plants represented there. Now, looking across the bottom of the slide, There are 4 basils there. Susan and I were able to taste test one, and I feel like my research gave me confidence in terms of being able to share the flavor profiles of the other 3 as well. So starting on the left, you'll see Marseillaise dwarf. This is one of the larger of the miniature basils. It gets about 12 inches tall. It has bigger leaves than the others, and it has a really good reputation as having a good sweet basil flavor. To its right is Fino Verde. This is actually a very old basil. It's an heirloom that's been around for many years. And it has a reputation of having a sweet but a little bit spicy basil flavor, more reminiscent, some say, of Greek basils than Italian. And then if you jump all the way over to the far right side, you see Pluto, which has that same sweet and spicy flavor profile. Pluto is also the smallest of the small basils that I could find to be able to share with you. It only gets about 6 inches tall. All of these basils will fit easily in a 6-inch pot. Pluto will fit easily in a 3-inch pot, so it's perfect for windowsill. And then to Pluto's left is purple wall basil. This one I was able to grow from seed. Susan and I tasted it. We both really liked it. It had a nice sweet basil flavor. It is a gorgeous plant. I love this plant, and I can see myself growing it and having it in my kitchen window every year. Now let's change gears a bit, look at some different flavors and also some different cultures and their favorite basils. So we're going to start with citrus and mint flavored basils. And the most common for most of us are the lemon flavored basils. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see Mrs. Burns lemon basil. This is probably the most popular lemon basil sold. I'm going to put it on hold. I want to acknowledge it, but I'm going to put it on hold and come back to it in a minute. I want to look to the right of it to the generic lemon basil. This is also an heirloom basil, by the way. This is the basil that was the common basil grown in English gardens in the 1600s. This is what everybody used. This was their common basil that they incorporated to flavor their foods. Very different from what we think of as common basil today. Susan and I both really like this basil. It has a big, bold lemon fragrance. It has a big lemon flavor, had a little hint of pepper on the end of it, and altogether it was very, very nice. The basil above that with the darker green leaves is lime basil. And its leaves also smell of lemon. And I will be honest, I was not expecting it to taste any different than the lemon basil, but it did. The flavor profile was actually more like a lime zest. It wasn't as fruity as the lemon. It's a little softer, but definitely a hint of lime there. This is a basil that I could see myself using the individual leaves mixed into a tossed salad with a lot of other mixed greens to get that little hint of citrus every once in a while. I think that would be absolutely delightful. Now back to Mrs. Burns lemon basil. This is an heirloom out of New Mexico. It is considered to be an improved version of the standard lemon basil. It is a bigger plant, has bigger leaves. It's highly productive. Our experience in terms of fragrance and flavor is that the fragrance was much softer, much lighter, and the flavor itself was lighter, and it had a little hint of mint at the end of it. I would grow it happily, I would use it happily, but my pick of these 3 basils would be the classic basic lemon basil. I just felt like that was terrific. Now let's move to the right side of the screen though, and look at some basils from other cultures. Rayhan is the Persian basil. This is the common basil in the Persian culture. It is also a gorgeous ornamental plant. You see those purple streaked leaves, those big spikes of purple flowers. It's very fragrant. Its reported flavor profile is minty with classic basil flavor and a hint of lemon. When Susan and I taste tested it, we got the minty and the classic bit very clearly. We never picked up the lemon in either the fragrance or the flavor. And I've tasted it since and had the same experience. But it is a really nice flavor profile, and I can totally appreciate how a culture would embrace this and incorporate it into their cuisine. It's really very nice. It's different from what we're used to. It's very, very nice. Now, the one below is called Chinese sweet basil. It is a beautiful, beautiful plant. It has very delicate, soft leaves, soft stems, and the fragrance of the, first of all, let me just preface this and say, I think this is the sleeper hit of the 5 basils on the screen. I didn't know what to expect from it, and I love it. The fragrance is a very light lemon fragrance. The flavor is lemon and light floral, and there was not a sharp edge to it, which may be why it got the sweet name in Chinese sweet. I absolutely love this basil, and I could see myself growing this basil every year. Absolutely delightful. Okay, let's change flavors and change cultures and take a look at some basils with the anise and cinnamon flavor profiles. So we're going to start on the left side of the screen with Thai sweet basil at the top. For those of you who love Thai food and Vietnamese food, this basil is going to be very familiar to you. It has the green leaves, the purple stems, the spikes of purple flowers, and a very sweet anise flavor. The basil below there is Siam Queen. It's considered to be an improved version of sweet Thai basil. It has, you see those big cones, rather than the flower spikes, it's got those big cones of red flowers. It's got larger, shinier leaves. It still has that wonderful sweet anise flavor. 2 nice things to note about the Thai basils. First of all, they are highly resistant to basil downy mildew. The other nice feature is that you can let your Thai basils go to flower and never worry about pinching them back or cutting them back, because it does not seem to affect the flavor in the leaves, which is a wonderful boon for the health of your garden. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, to the left of Siam Queen is another of the everleaf basils. This is everleaf Thai towers. And so again, if you don't care at all about the flowers, what you're looking for is major leaf production for your kitchen, this would be a great selection for you. It also has that tiny column structure that's great for containers. Now, moving to the right are 2 perhaps a little less common basils. Up at the top is cardinal basil. It's got those big red flower cones like you see on Siam Queen. It's a big, tall basil though. Has big leaves, it has big spicy fragrance. It definitely has an anise flavor profile, but our tasting experience was, it was really kind of a harsh anise. I would not grow this as a flavor replacement for Thai basils. I would definitely grow it as an ornamental for cut flowers or for fragrance. And then down below there is cinnamon basil. And this is a really interesting basil. Susan and I did not detect cinnamon in the fragrance or the flavor. It did have spice. It definitely has an anise profile to it. And this is one of those basils that goes by 2 different names in the marketplace. And that's, I think, is important here. The other name for this basil is Mexican spice. It's an heirloom basil from Mexico. And one of my personal goals this year is to find some Mexican recipes that incorporate this basil, so I can learn how to incorporate it into my household's cuisine. We eat a lot of Tex-Mex food, but I've never encountered a dish that called for basil or for this type of basil. So this is going to be a fun kitchen experiment for me this year. Now, back to that teaser that I gave you early on in the presentation, the 2 different basils, one misrepresented as the other. This is holy basil. This is Tulsi, very prominent in the Hindu religion. And as you can see in the left and middle bottom of the screen, Tulsi comes in 2 different varieties or colors, green and purple leaves. And the green leaf variety is also known as white or Lakshmi Tulsi, and the purple as black or Krishna Tulsi in the Hindu religion. These basils are sacred plants. They are not used culinarily for food. They are used for tonics and they're used medicinally. If you want to grow holy basil, this is the basil that you want to grow, and you should be very familiar with how it looks. These are very sturdy, erect little plants. The leaves are very distinctive. They're serrated, but they also have a tendency to cup. They're shiny, and the edges of the leaves tend to become very wavy. It's a very distinctive look. Now look at the basil that's often sold as holy basil. It's very, very different. This is spice basil, but it typically appears as holy basil, Kapoor Tulsi, and sometimes even as sacred basil. I grew this basil last year as holy basil because the seed packet said that's what it was, and it's not. It's spice basil. I love this basil. I absolutely love it. It has a sweet clove fragrance. It has a wonderful sweet clove flavor. It makes a mean fried rice. I will always grow this basil. It makes me happy, but it's not holy basil. If you want to grow holy basil, make sure you're familiar with the look at these leaves, and that's the basil that you want to grow. If you like a sweet clove basil, then spice basil is definitely a good choice for you. And I also want to point out that I purchased another basil under the name of Blue Spice, and Susan and I taste tested both of these basils together. And what we saw and experienced is the plants look identical, the fragrance is identical, the flavor is identical. So while it's spice and Blue Spice, I think that truly this is the same variety, but it does mean it should be easy for you to find it if this is appealing to you. I love this basil. Now, I mentioned early on that basil was thought to have originated in Africa. And so it would be remiss if I didn't include some African basil. There are 4 here whose seeds are available, so we can grow them in this country. And starting on the left-hand bottom, you'll see Nunam. Nunam is an heirloom basil from Ghana. It has large, sturdy leaves. At least in its small size, which it still is for my plant, it doesn't really look like a basil, and it didn't taste like a basil to Susan and me. It was more like a plant that we would grow for salad greens, and I think it would be really nice in that regard. It also is recognized as having very impressive antibiotic qualities. So that may be another reason that it has been incorporated as an heirloom basil in the local population. Now, to the right of Nunam is another basil from Ghana. It's called a cocoa misa. It's a much smaller basil. You see it there beside the farmer growing it. Beautiful little plant. And the name cocoa misa means chicken dance, which I love. This is a plant that's used to season poultry in the local population. And in our country, we would probably say it's a seasoning that makes the chicken sing. In Ghana, it's the chicken or the seasoning that makes the chicken dance. So I love that. It's very delicate. It has a little bit of that classic basil flavor that we're familiar with from Italian cooking, and also a little bit of kind of an interesting vegetal flavor. Very nice seasoning basil, I think. Now to the upper right, you see Eritrean basil. This is from Eritrea, of course. It is said to be absolutely stunning in flower. It is a very pretty basil. It's delicate. It's got small, delicate leaves. Susan and I both really enjoyed the flavor of this basil, some of that classic basil flavor, and also kind of a fresh, grassy vegetable sort of flavor. Really, really nice combination. We both really like that a lot. The one below is Mirahani basil from Zanzibar. You see those ruffled leaves. It's beautiful, beautiful plant. And also really an interesting one. The flavor profile is very complex. You get some of the classic basil flavor. There are hints of mint. There are hints of many other flavors. There's a lot of interesting, rich chemistry going on in this basil. And one of its virtues is that it is highly resistant to basil downy mildew. This is the basil that the team at Rutgers University used to cross with sweet basil to produce their line of downy mildew resistant basils. It's also interesting to note that the team that developed the Prospera line of resistant basils also use some African basils. I was not able to find out which ones, but what this slide really tells us is that that rich genetic diversity in Africa is giving huge benefits here and around the world as we encounter challenges with basil, because there are a lot of different basils out there that we can use to cross and hopefully give us some stronger plants. Now, some other reasons to grow basil. I've talked about flowers in terms of the Thai basils. Let some of the basils in your garden go to flower, whether it's Thai basils or other basils. It's great support for beneficial insects, and beneficial insects are very beneficial for your garden. They're great at helping to keep pests down. By letting the basils flower, the beneficials are getting nectar, they're getting pollen, and they're just making your garden a healthier place. Which really brings us to the topic of companion planting in a more general sense. Now, when I talk about companion planting, what I'm talking about is putting two plants close together in a garden with the idea that one of them will potentially enhance the growth or health of the other, or that it will bring in beneficial insects like we just talked about with basil flowers, or that it will repel pest insects. And there is evidence that basil can help accomplish all three of those in the garden. It's great support for beneficials. It does tend to repel mosquitoes and flies. Now, it won't get rid of them 100%, but they don't like it. So they don't like to be around the basils. So the more you have, the better. And then also, basils have been linked to better performance in tomatoes and also in asparagus. So a lot of good reasons to include more basils in your garden. And two final notes from me before I hand it off to Susan. I've talked about flowers before, and certainly they're great for beneficials as well, but they're also great for the gardener. Some basils make terrific cut flowers. Three of them represented here we've talked about already: cardinal, cinnamon, and Siam queen. There are two we haven't talked about yet. The bottom center is aromato basil, which is a gorgeous plant. You see the purple in the leaves and the deep purple spikes. It's also got a very spicy fragrance. Not a basil to grow for flavor, but definitely for cut flowers and for a fragrance garden. And then to its right is African blue. Now, African blue is an accidental hybrid basil. It appeared in someone's greenhouse. It is of African heritage, and it's sterile. So you have to buy it as a plant or get a cutting from a friend and root it and grow it. It is a big floriferous basil. It will bloom in crazy amounts of flowers throughout the growing season, and it's a bee magnet. It's a gorgeous big plant in Northern Virginia. It can get 3 feet tall and wide, so you want to give it plenty of room in your garden. If any of our listeners are from further south, down around Florida, I'm told it can get to 5 feet. This is a big, impressive, heavily flowered plant. It is not one to grow for flavor or for fragrance. It's all about the beneficials. And then finally, fragrance. I think it's something that many of us tend to overlook in our gardens. I've got a representation of a variety of different fragrances here: anise, lemon, and my personal favorite up in the top left, spice basil, which has that sweet clove flavor. That is my aromatherapy. I love that basil. Keep it in my kitchen because the fragrance just makes me smile. So think about the fragrances you love, because there's probably a basil that has that for you. That would be really valuable to include in your garden. So I'm going to pause now for questions, and then we'll hand off to Susan. Are there any questions?
Yes, there are some questions, and there was actually a very interesting comment I think you guys would like. Someone with familiarity of Persian cooking mentioned that the Persian basil is never actually cooked in a dish. It's served on the side with watercress, mint, radishes and feta cheese, kind of like tzatziki would be in Greek cuisine, or I guess raita in Indian cuisine. It's not cooked with, but it's served as kind of a side flavor enhancer, which I thought
That's
was
wonderful.
Yeah, isn't
Yeah,
that
I
great?
love that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so excited. Now I know how to use it right away. Thank you.
Yes. Someone asked, is it too late to start basil from seed now?
No, Susan will talk about starting basil later, but in terms of timing, you can start basil anytime. And in fact, we often encourage people to start a second crop in the summer for fall basil. So it's not too late. Go for it.
Okay. Can you recommend any places to find the African or Thai basil plants?
Thai basil is usually very easily available at garden centers, Thai, Siam Queen, or both. African blue, I have not seen in the garden centers, but there is someone at the Old Town Farmers Market in Alexandria who sells it. She brings in lots of herbs every Saturday. And so that one you might have to do a little bit more research, but if you're local in Northern Virginia, certainly the Old Town Market, and I believe the company is called Blue Ridge Botanicals. So they may appear in other places, other locations as well.
Great. Someone asked, once the basil starts flowering, would you stop using its leaves?
It depends on the basil. I wouldn't stop using the leaves. Susan will talk about how to prune your basil in order to discourage the flowering. But here's the thing is once it starts flowering on a stem, it's going to keep flowering, but it won't necessarily keep flowering on the rest of the plant. So Susan will talk about pruning, but there should be ways to salvage so you can keep getting good flavored leaves.
Okay. Someone asked, this sounds like a Leslie question. What would be your top basils to grow for flavor that you would grow every year?
It
It
depends
wasn't
on the
Leslie, it was someone else.
it depends on the flavors you love. For instance, I really love anise flavored basils, the Thai basils, and Susan doesn't care for those. But I definitely like having a Thai basil around. I love sweet basil, and I'm a pesto addict, so I always have those. I also like playing with different flavors. I like a lot of experimentation in the kitchen. So now that I've tasted all these different citrusy basils, I can see myself having a lemon basil around. And I'm probably leaving out some. I know there's some that I'll grow regardless. Because they're just beautiful, or they make me happy. But that's a good sample for me, but it's going to be such a personal, individual answer.
Susan, do you want to weigh in on that question?
No, I think Kathryn wrapped it up pretty well.
Okay. And finally, someone asked if you would please put the fragrance slide back up.
Was there a question with that? Or I can walk through the ones that I have here. I have spice
Okay,
and
why
blue
don't you
spice.
do that? That would be
Yeah.
good.
Okay. I have spice and blue spice, which we believe to be the same variety. Lemon basil is amazing for fragrance if you like citrusy fragrances. Cinnamon basil is very spicy, kind of anisey. Eritrean has its own distinct kind of spicy fragrance. And then cardinal basil is also a very spicy, kind of anisey one. So that or a Thai basil would be great for an anisey fragrance.
Okay, great.
You can get your basils from a number of different sources. Basil seed is easy to grow, and it's the option that gives you access to the most different types of varieties. You can also use transplants, which are the little plants that you see in the center photograph on the slide. And more different types of basil are becoming available in transplants. One of the benefits of using transplants is that you can rub your hand over the plant and get a sense of the fragrance, which would be important if you were looking for a very specific fragrance in your basil. Also, you can grow it from tip cuttings. You can grow it from cuttings from a neighbor's plant. You can grow it from the basil that you buy in the grocery store. Just stick it in a vase on the counter and leave it for a little bit. For the green sweet basils, it takes on average about 2 weeks before you have a root ball of sufficient size to put in your growing medium. The reds and purple basils take a little longer. Basil in Northern Virginia, where Kathryn and I garden, is a tender perennial that's grown as an annual. That means that we have to start out with fresh plants every year. Basil can be grown in the ground or in a container. And as Kathryn mentioned, the size of basil, depending on what you plant, varies widely. So you need to take that into account when determining where in the ground you're going to put your basil or what size planter you're going to use. Basil grows best in full sun, which is 6 hours or more a day. But I've grown basil for years in part shade, and it does just fine. You want to grow your basil in a rich, moist, well-drained soil that has a lot of organic matter in it. If it's in the ground, you'll use a good standard potting soil if you're growing it in the container. And it's important that you keep the plants evenly moist, whether they're in a container or in the ground. And once the plant starts growing, you're going to want to pinch the stems back. That will encourage the plant to get bushier. It will result in more leaves, and it will prevent flowering. And as Kathryn mentioned, once the plant starts flowering, it can affect the flavor of the basil. And at some point, you're not going to be able to prevent it from flowering anymore. And at that point, what I generally do is just leave the basil in the garden to attract the pollinators and start some fresh basil seeds to replace it for eating. One thing you need to keep in mind is that basil is very, very sensitive to the cold. When you plant it outdoors, you want to make sure it's well past your last hard frost date and the soil temperatures are 60 degrees or higher. Deer and rabbits don't usually bother basil grown outdoors because they don't like the flavor and the scent of it. But that being said, if you've got deer or rabbit in your area, you'll want to monitor your plants because you may have the one deer or rabbit that decides they're going to test your basil anyway, and you need to be prepared for that. We'll address the diseases about fusarium wilt and basil downy mildew later on in the presentation. If you don't have a place to grow basil outdoors, it also grows very well indoors. And what you might want to do is start with looking for some of the dwarf varieties that meet the flavor profiles that you're interested in. One that would fit in a 12 to 6-inch pot so that you can place it maybe on a windowsill or on under grow lights or a table near a window. As I mentioned before, just like with the plants grown in containers outside, you want to use a good standard potting soil mix. And for your plants inside, and you could do this for the ones outside too if you wanted to, you might want to mix in an organic slow release fertilizer before planting to help keep feeding the plant over time. Indoors, the most critical thing for the success of your basil plant is making sure you have enough light. That means if you're growing it in a window, you want to use a south or western facing window that provides at least 4 hours of direct sun. If you're using grow lights, you'll need to have those on for a longer period of time. And one way to tell if you're getting enough light in your window grown plants is if they start to tilt to the window. If they start to tilt to the window, you're not getting sufficient light, and you may need to add supplemental lighting in order to keep the plants healthy. Basils grow best in warm temperatures, whether indoors or out. And so ideally, you want to grow your basil in a temperature of 75 degrees or warmer. The truth of the matter is that very few of us keep our houses at that temperature, and you shouldn't have a problem with your basil unless you're really, really cold. Keep the plants evenly moist and pinch them back frequently, just as you would with the basil outside. One thing to keep in mind is just because you're growing your basil indoors does not mean you won't run into pest or disease problems. When it comes to protecting your plants from your basil plants from pests, this is like a little tongue twister. You need to know what the most common culprits are. You need to know what the damage looks like that they cause. And you need to monitor your plants continually in the hopes that if you do have one of these pests appear, you'll catch it quickly and you'll be able to deal with it before it becomes a significant problem. The bugs on this page, on this slide, are the most common pests that affect basil. They are Japanese beetles, slugs, and aphids and spider mites. Japanese beetles, there's the photograph on the far left, are very distinctive, and you can often see them on the plants. They eat the leaves and they eat the green part of the leaf between the veins. So if you have a leaf on your basil that looks kind of like lace, that's a sign of Japanese beetles as well. They're easily controlled using hand controls. Wearing gloves, you can pick them off by hand and either crush them or toss them into some soapy water. You can also knock them off the plants into soapy water if you like. One thing you don't want to do is use one of those commercial Japanese beetle traps. They'll attract more Japanese beetles than their little container can hold. And the beetles that can't fit in the trap are going to be looking for something to eat, and your basil is going to be a likely target. Another common pest is slugs. In Northern Virginia, gray slugs are the most common type of slug, and that's what we have a picture of here. There's several different ways to control slugs, and I'm going to just mention two. One is a trap. Slugs eat your basil during the night, and during the day, they like to go into a shady spot out of the sun. So if you put a board or a piece of carpet on the ground near your basil, the slugs will crawl underneath it. And then in the late evening or in the morning, you can pick up the board and scrape the slugs into some soapy water, or if you're not squeamish, you can just smash them on the board. Another option is diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is a very coarse subject that you sprinkle on the ground around the base of your basil. When the slug crawls over it, it cuts the slug, they dehydrate and die. Diatomaceous earth will wash away in the rain, so you have to reapply it after rain. Other things that will work similarly that you might want to consider include a coarse builder's sand, or even cracked eggshells. And broken eggshells are handy to use because they won't wash away in the rain. Aphids and spider mites can affect basils growing both inside and outside. And there are several ways to address them. And the easiest, which is not on this slide, is to actually spray your plants with a light spray of water. It'll knock aphids off the plants and they won't be able to get back on. It's also a good choice for spider mites because spider mites like when it's dry, so keeping the plant a little moist is helpful. Another good thing to consider is attracting beneficial insects. For example, lady beetles will eat all different kinds of aphids, and you can attract them to your garden by planting flowers such as sunflowers, coreopsis, or liatris. If those don't work, you can also move up to trying an insecticidal soap. And you can use an insecticidal soap both inside and out. Just be very careful to follow the directions on the container and be sure to spray the undersides of the leaves, particularly for spider mites, because that's where they tend to congregate. There are two diseases that you need to be concerned about. The first is Fusarium wilt, and it's a soil-borne fungus that is pretty nasty. And it's deceptive because your plant's going to be growing along, it's going to look good. It gets to about 12 inches tall, maybe a little shorter. And all of a sudden the leaves will start curling, they turn yellow and get brown on them. You may see brown on the stem, as you see in this picture here. And you go out one morning and your plant has totally wilted and it's lying in a heap on the ground. There's nothing you can do about Fusarium wilt. If this happens to one of your plants, you want to dig it up immediately, get it out of the garden, bag it up and put it in your trash. Never put it in your compost. And you might even want to, after you dig it up, disinfect your shovel so you don't accidentally spread the fungus into another part of your garden. You can avoid Fusarium wilt by making sure that you're using disease-resistant seeds if you're growing your basil from seeds. There are also disease-resistant varieties, and we'll talk about those a little bit later in the presentation. Though one thing I wanted to say is that Fusarium wilt fungus will stay in the ground for a long, long time, maybe even indefinitely. And people have different opinions about whether or not you should plant anything that's susceptible to Fusarium wilt in those spaces, even the disease-resistant varieties. But there are some, and we'll talk about them. The other bad boy on the block is basil downy mildew. And basil downy mildew is a pathogen. It was originally discovered in Florida in 2007. It's dispersed primarily by the wind, and that's how it's moved up the East Coast. It's now been reported in 44 states and the District of Columbia. And basil downy mildew is also something that can be a little tricky to diagnose. If you look at the photographs on this slide, you can see in the lower left, the first symptom is that the leaves start to yellow. Then if you look at the top right, brown spots start to form in the yellow areas of the basil. Those symptoms are also the same symptoms that basil will show if you have a nutritional deficiency. The key to identifying basil downy mildew is to flip the leaf over. If you see this gray downy growth on the underside, then you do have basil downy mildew. And if you're concerned or you're not sure what you're dealing with, in your resource handout, we've given you a link to a Cornell University website where they have wonderful photographs, and they show both basils with nutrition deficiencies and those with basil downy mildew to help you more accurately identify what's going on with your plant. If that doesn't work and you live in the Arlington, Alexandria area, you can contact our help desk, and that contact information is also on your resource handout. If you live somewhere else, you can contact your local extension agent for help in identifying what the problem is. You can try cultural managements to control basil downy mildew. There's also other kinds of downy mildew, but we're talking specifically about the basil downy mildew here. You can do things like be sure to water your plants from the bottom to keep the leaves dry, for example. But the truth of the matter is that basil downy mildew grows best when there's humid nights and heavy morning dews. And there's not much you can do about that. So you've got two options. One, Rutgers University did some research and discovered that the reds basils, the Thai basils, the spice basils, the citrus basils, they all tended to get less severe symptoms of basil downy mildew. But if you're looking to grow the green, the sweet traditional basils, your only choice is going to be to get a disease-resistant variety. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. The first thing to keep in mind is disease resistance does not mean disease-proof. What it means is that the disease-resistant varieties will get basil downy mildew later in the season, and the infestation should be less. So by getting the disease later in the season, you get a longer harvest period. We've given you examples of 3 here on this slide. There are others. The first two, Prospera Italian large leaf and Rutgers Obsession, are resistant to both Fusarium wilt and Basil downy mildew. The third, Rutgers Devotion, is resistant to Basil downy mildew. I was not able to find any information about whether it was also resistant to Fusarium wilt. Sadly, growers have started reporting that Basil downy mildew is showing up earlier on their disease-resistant varieties, and the infestations are getting worse than they have in previous years. This suggests that the pathogen is changing, and scientists continue to work to develop improved disease-resistant varieties. This is something that you'll want to monitor if Basil downy mildew is an issue where you garden. Okay, any questions on growing your basil, pests, or diseases?
Yes, ma'am. One of the participants noted that they thought they had less downy mildew if they grew their basil in containers. Does that make any sense to you?
It could because of spacing. I have to say, I grow all my basils in containers, and knock on wood, I've had other types of downy mildew in my garden, but my basils so far been okay.
Okay. You had mentioned putting a slow release fertilizer in the medium. Do you have any recommendations for an organic slow release fertilizer?
No, I don't.
Okay. Susan, do you have any experience growing basil in hydroponic devices? Someone asked about, I think, a brand called Seed Pod Hydroponic.
I've never done that, but I'd be interested to try sometime. I know a lot of commercial basil is grown hydroponically, and interestingly enough, some of the best information I could find about my research on dealing with Basil downy mildew and Fusarium wilt was in publications that were designed for the greenhouse and hydroponic industry.
Oh, interesting. That's very neat. Someone asked if a spray of rosemary oil would work against aphids and spider mites.
I'm not familiar with that, so I can't.
Okay. Okay. And that's it for the questions for now. Thank you.
All right. Well, so far we've been talking about basil as a plant for fragrance and flowers, but basil seeds are a pretty cool resource too. If you're growing your own basil from seed, the seed packets often contain many more seeds than you'll actually use. And while basil seed can keep if stored properly and remain viable for up to 4 years, it's a lot more fun to grow it as microgreens. You just throw it in your growing medium, and when you have the microgreens, you cut them off with some kitchen shears and use them as a garnish like you would regular basil. In your resource handout, we've given you a link to another Master Gardener class on growing microgreens if that's of interest to you. Another thing that you might not be aware is that basil seeds, organic and food grade basil seeds, are edible. And in fact, they're used to thicken drinks in some Southeast Asian cuisines. When you soak the seeds in water, they get this kind of a gelatinous membrane around the outside, and it thickens water. And when you drink it, you can chew it, and it has sort of a popping texture in your mouth. If you're a fan of bubble teas, this might be something that appeals to you. The flavor is reported to be a sort of a combination of floral, maybe a little hint of classic basil, and maybe some pepper or other flavors. This might be something that you want to experiment with, and if it is, again, be sure you're using organic or food grade basil seeds. And the food grade basil seeds can sometimes be difficult to find, but your best bet is a well-stocked Asian, Thai, or perhaps Indian market. Basil is the gift that keeps on giving. You have these wonderful plants in the garden. They smell great. You've got these gorgeous flowers, and then you can eat it. So how you're going to use your basil will influence how you're going to harvest it. And we're going to talk first about harvesting basil for food and drinks. As we've mentioned earlier, with the green basils, you want to cut the stems before flowering starts. And as Kathryn mentioned, for the Thai and the Vietnamese basils, you can let them still flower. Your plant should be at least 8 inches tall. And when you can take either leaves or stems, I'd recommend taking stems because that's the branching that encourages further growth and also postpones flowering in your green basils. Be sure to leave at least 4 leaves on the plant so the plant can rejuvenate. Once you've harvested your basil, it stores well at room temperature, and you can also freeze it, and we'll talk about both of those. Here's some examples of storing basil on the kitchen counter, either in a vase or a cup. Another way you can store it on the kitchen counter is to wrap it in a damp towel and let it lay on the counter. This is a particularly good option if you've harvested a bunch of leaves and you end up not using all the ones that you wanted, the ones you harvested. So you can wrap them up in the towel and they'll last for a couple of days stored this way. One thing you do not want to do is store your basil in the freezer. At temperatures below 50 degrees, the leaves turn black and slimy and are not usable. One of the great joys in life, both Kathryn and I think, is eating with fresh basil. And there are so many different things you can do with that. Some things that immediately come to mind might be some of the traditional uses, like combining the sweet basils with eggplant, zucchini, squash, or using it in traditional sauces like the Italian pesto or the French pea stew. But you have a lot of other options for things you can do with it. You can slice it finely as a garnish, which you could use on salads or on savory things. And if you're going to use it as a garnish and slice it, be sure you use a really sharp knife. A dull blade will bruise the leaves, but it won't cut it. Some people, for that reason, use kitchen shears to slice their basil. And I even read some place where someone recommended tearing basil leaves for the most flavor. I don't know that my taste buds are sophisticated enough to tell the difference, but I'm going to give it a try and experiment to see if I can. If you're going to be adding basil to hot dishes, add it last for the most flavor. And don't forget about using basils in desserts. You can make basil sorbets, you can make basil ice creams, and you can add basil to cookies. One of the fun things to think about in using basil is to take your favorite flavors and match them to a specific use. So for example, if you're a big fan of the citrus basils or the cinnamons, you might prefer to use that in clove or use that in tea. Another thing you might want to do is use it to flavor vinegars. Your minty flavor or clove might be your favorite, and you may want to consider using dried version of that in a potpourri. Kathryn did an interesting experiment. She took a bit of everything, mixed it all together and put it in a lettuce salad and was very pleased with the results. She had a very complicated flavor from that. And I think it would be something definitely to try if you've got a variety of basils to choose from. Basil is also used to flavor beverages. It can be anything from a basil flavored water to a mixer, such as a simple syrup that's used in both either non-alcoholic or alcoholic drinks. If you're going to use your basil to flavor water, the process is called infusion. And what you need to do is slightly bruise the basil leaves in order to release the essential oils. And you do that by placing a few of the leaves in your hand and smacking them. That'll be sufficient to release the essential oils. And one other thing to keep in mind when you're making infusions is the longer you leave the basil in the water or whatever you're flavoring, the stronger the taste will be. So you'll want to taste it regularly so that you can remove the basil at the time the flavor is perfect for the use you're going to use it for. Basil freezes very well. And here's an example where it has been mixed with oil and Cuisinart and then put into an ice cube tray and frozen and taken out and stored in a plastic bag. You can also freeze it in water or just freeze the leaves plain as in the two photographs on the right-hand side. You just put the leaves in a package and put them in the freezer. They will freeze. If you do them as a group like this, you'll have to break off the pieces of basil to use them. And in every case, when you have frozen basil, you'll want to use it in cooking because it's limp when it defrosts and it's not visually pleasing, but the taste is excellent. And many people say that freezing basil is the best way to preserve the flavor. There are a lot of really strong opinions about whether or not basil should be dried. The people that argue against drying basil will point out that basil leaves have a lot of moisture in them and that in humid conditions they can mold before they'll dry. People who advocate against drying also point out that the dried basil leaves often turn an unappetizing brown color and they can lose a lot of flavor. That being said, there may be reasons that you need dried basil and you want to give it a try. In your handout, we've given you links to several resources on drying basil, and we're going to just focus on 3 here. You can air dry your basil by hanging it upside down in bunches until it dries to a crumbly consistency. If you're going to try this, you might want to do it in an air-conditioned house where there's not quite so much humidity in the house. The other 2 examples we've given you are drying it using a dehydrator and a microwave. Kathryn just has done both of these examples, and her results were that the microwave versions seem to be the easiest to do, and that you can tell that the basil is much more attractive and has a much better color when it's dried with the microwave as opposed to the dehydrator. So if you're looking to dry your basil, you might want to try that option first. And in both the cases of the dehydrator and the microwave, you'll want to follow the manufacturer's directions. Harvesting your basil for bouquets is different, in part because you definitely want the flowers in this case. You're also going to want long stems to use in your floral arrangements. So when you're harvesting basil for a bouquet, you want to harvest them early in the morning. And basil plants have a single center shoot that moves up through the plant. You want to cut that first, leaving 3 or 4 stems at the bottom of the plant. When you take that center stem off first, the remaining stems will grow longer, and so you'll be able to use them later for your floral arrangements. Whether you're using the center stem or one of the side branches, remove all the growth that's going to be below the water line before you add them to your floral arrangement, and they'll stay in a vase for 7 to 10 days. The ornamental blue spice basil that Kathryn mentioned reportedly will keep in a vase up to maybe even a month if you change the water every day. In the handout that we've given you a list of several basils that people grow for bouquets. 2 that you often see used in this purpose are Mrs. Burns lemon and cinnamon basil. Mrs. Burns lemon is used because its leaves are a light green color that makes a nice contrast with other greens in a floral arrangement. And the cinnamon basil is a popular choice because it has really cool purple stems. Wherever you grow your basil, whether it's inside or out, whether you're growing it for fragrance or for eat, put it someplace where you'll be in constant contact with it, so you can take advantage of the fragrance. Aromatherapists ascribe all kinds of wonderful qualities to the fragrance of basil. Kathryn and I are not aromatherapists, but we can tell you that being around basil makes us both very happy, and we expect it'll make you happy too. With that, we're going to end our presentation. Are there any questions on harvesting or storing basil, or any questions on any part of the presentation?
There were a couple of questions on pinching back basil. First of all, should you do that to all basils? And second of all, if you're pinching them back, at what level should you pinch?
Those are good questions. I think I'm going to ask part of it, and I may ask Kathryn to chime in on part of it. If you're growing a green basil and you're growing it for eating or flavoring beverages, you definitely want to pinch it back. And you want to do that regularly to make it branch out. And you can pinch it back to wherever it looks like it's going to make sense for it to branch out. The main thing is to remember not to take all the stems and all the leaves. Now, if you're growing a Thai or Vietnamese basil, the flowers on those don't affect the taste. You can pinch them back to try to make the plants bushy, but you don't have to pinch them back to prevent the flowering. Kathryn, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you captured it perfectly. I've grown Thai basils many times, and I can't remember pinching them back. They always end up full and beautiful.
Okay, there was one final question on how long to microwave basil, but I imagine you would say experiment, and every microwave is different.
Right, and
That's true. But let me tell you what I did, because my microwave is really old and it didn't have instructions on it. So the plate that you saw there, I put the leaves in and I gave it a burst at full power for 33 seconds. I took it out, I looked at them, they were a little bit stuck to the plate, so I jiggled them loose. I put it back in for 22 seconds and they were perfect. So, two rounds and less than a minute total worked. So I would say maybe that is the starting point, and then play with it a little bit.
Okay. Well, the thank yous are pouring in. Everyone is saying they learned a lot. They didn't expect to love it as much as they did, but that this was a great presentation. And I would concur. You both are sort of naturally good presenters. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And thank everyone for coming. We hope you grow a lot of basil in your garden this summer.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.